By far, one of the greatest joys of aviation is being able to share it with passengers, whether that be family, friends, or a cute date. That being said, sometimes we overlook the experience for our passengers. And by that, I mean, do we give our passengers the right amount of information to make their experience enjoyable? Today, we're going to go over my three-stage process for passenger briefing, and hopefully it's something that you can use in your own briefings as well.
I'm Joe Walker, a private pilot who enjoys the freedom of flight and sharing it with those around me. Join me on the journey to becoming a better, safer pilot. Subscribe to experience the joys that flying can offer, and let's take to the sky and learn together. This is Plain Joe.
Now, before I begin, these are just my tips for my passenger briefings. They're not going to be perfect. I can't think of everything. So if you have comments, questions, concerns, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts and inputs. But these are just the tips and tricks that I use for my passenger briefings. Just like I always say, any good pre-flight starts before you get to the airport. The same thing goes for your passenger briefing. Number one, I start with a high-level flight plan, and that's going to be what airport we're leaving from, where we're flying to, whether we're doing something special like maybe an orbit of the city or flying over a cool lake or something like that. And then I also let them know approximately how long I expect it to take, but I do let them know that it will vary with weather, traffic, etc. But it just gives them like a good idea of what the plan is for the day. Next, I like to make sure that they are hydrated and have eaten, right? Hydration and food are key pieces to enjoying the flight. You don't want to get up there and be really hungry or super dehydrated. Especially for my friends in the hot states, make sure you, yourself, and your passengers are hydrated. Then I also like to go over a high-level idea of the weather that can be expected. If it's really sunny out, that lets the passengers know to bring sunglasses, sunscreen. If it's windy, maybe you shouldn't be taking the passenger. You don't want their first flight to be really turbulent. But if there's going to be some bumps, let them know ahead of time. In my experience, passengers are really reassured when they see how much I take into consideration before we even get to the airport or in the aircraft. So just to recap, before even leaving for the airport, I go over the high-level flight path, I go over hydration, food, other basic essentials, and then I go over the weather that can be expected. Real quick, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel, and it also helps me to understand what type of content you all enjoy. So help me out. If you have an idea for other topics I should cover, drop them in the comments. Now, stage 2 of my passenger briefing begins when we get to the airport, and it changes based on who my passengers are, how involved they want to be, or how involved I'm willing to let them be. So for example, one of the first things I like to do is go over a pre-flight of the outside of the aircraft with my passenger, tell them all the things that I'm considering. And that can be after I do my own full pre-flight, or I can have them walk through it with me if they're more of a savvy passenger. So again, I will grab the checklist. In fact, let me grab that real quick. All right, got it. Remember, always use your checklist. What I will do is I will grab my checklist, and if there's a second copy, or if I have it on my iPad, I will give that to my passenger, and I will walk through that checklist with them. Now, make sure that you only do this if you know you are not going to get distracted, right? Safety is paramount, and you as the pilot in command need to make sure that you are pre-flying the airplane to the best of your ability. So if you're going to get distracted, do not involve your passenger in this step, but if you are fine doing this, then go ahead. For me, I actually like to have my passenger walk through it with me because it makes me talk out the information and I'm actually checking everything as I go. So it's kind of actually like a two-factor authentication for me, for lack of a better word. A verification. That's the word I was looking for. This is also a great opportunity for your passenger to ask a few questions or notice if something looks off. Maybe you have to double check that. All right, so you've completed the pre-flight and now you guys are getting into the aircraft, and now you get to the standard briefing checklist that most schools will have you go through. So actually on this checklist, you don't see very much. After the pre-flight inspection, it tells you to check the seats and belts, that they're in their locked positions and everything. But it doesn't talk about the door operation or emergency equipment. So I will go over that real quick. So in my personal checklist, I go over some standard items, and it is the seat adjustment, right? So you want to make sure that they are clicked into position, how to move them, but you want to make sure that they're locked in position so that when you take off, it's not sliding around or anything like that. Next up is going to be your seat belts, how to operate them. Each aircraft has different way that the seatbelt works, but typically you have the latch system across your waist. Some of them will have kind of a lateral shoulder strap, that word. Or if you're in one of the cool aircraft, then you have the double harness thing. So just make sure that your passenger knows how to latch them properly and that they lock, and then how to unlatch them, right? If an emergency comes up, you won't want to be explaining to your passenger how to get out of their seatbelt, right? So make sure that you do that. Next, I go over how to lock and latch the door. We want to make sure that they know that it is properly locked. Anyone who has seen my first solo video knows that the door actually came unlatched mid-flight. So I'm pretty big on making sure the door is latched. For the record, that wasn't my fault. That was a mechanical issue. Next up, I go over the emergency equipment in the aircraft, right? So whether it's one of the carbon monoxide detectors or the fire extinguisher, or even I go over the ELT, or emergency locator transponder. Next up, I go over communication, because communication is hugely important, right? So I go over what a sterile cockpit is, right? So I keep talking to a minimum during essential phases of flight, so takeoff, landing, communication with air traffic controller, other pilots. And then I also let them know if I hold up a hand that I just need the mic, don't take it personally. I need to concentrate on something. Then I also go over passing controls. If it's a passenger that is more savvy, and I'm willing to give them controls of the aircraft, shared controls, obviously. I talk about the three-way passive controls. So that's me saying, your controls, they say my controls, and I say your controls again. And that's just that three-stage verification that they have control of the aircraft. But remember, not every passenger should take control of the aircraft, right? At the end of the day, you are the pilot in command, so you need to make sure that everything is done safely as possible. Next up is feeling sick, right? So sometimes passengers will be a little bit dehydrated, or maybe bad food or something like that, or just the movement of the aircraft can make them dizzy or disoriented. So typically what I do is I'll have passengers focus on a point in the distance, and that'll kind of help them with their dizziness. If they need some air, I tell them where the vents are, whether it's by the feet or up above. I'll show them that. And then sometimes with certain passengers, I will have them ghost me on the controls. That kind of just helps passengers to feel more in control, which will help lessen the dizziness effect, right? So I'll still be holding onto the controls, but I'll say, hey, you can ghost the controls, feel what inputs I'm making, and that'll kind of help ease you because you feel like you're in control. Additionally, if they are feeling nauseous, I actually carry doggy bags in my backpack, my flight bag at all times. So I show them where the doggy bags are, and most people know how to pull out doggy bags, but I show them how to use it. Some airplanes will have bags in the rear seats, so just make sure that you know where it is if your passenger is feeling nauseous. Lastly, I go over communication again, but this time I tell them to speak up. If you see something, say something, right? So if there's something that they think I might not be aware of, then please let me know, communicate it to me, whether that is like something smells funny, they see another plane and they're not sure if I see it, I make sure to let them know, hey, tell me. Maybe it is something that I already know, but I would rather you say something than be concerned and confused. All right, so that concludes stage 2 of the briefing. That is the main thing that I go over before we taxi to the run-up area and get ready for our flight. So now we get to stage 3, and this is kind of like my bonus tips section. So there's a few things that I go over, really 5 items. So 1, I go over the headset, right? So these aviation headsets, they can be pretty sensitive. So I tell them how to move the mic right up to their mouth if they're really trying to talk, so I can actually hear them. But if they are eating food or something, I'll tell them just move the mic up, keep it out of the way, and we're good to go. Next, I will go over emergency operations. Now, this is something that I learned out of flight school in Manassas Regional Airport. It was kind of interesting because I had never seen it at another flight school before, but they go over a takeoff and landing briefing, right? So on takeoff, they say, what happens if there's an emergency? Well, these are the things that I would do, right? So whether it's flying straight out and landing in the field that's beyond the airport or something like that. If there's a fire, they go over like just a high level of what to expect if something like that were to happen. Now, it's not to scare the passenger, but it's just to make sure that they know like, hey, if something kind of unexpected happens, I'm going to take control over this, and this is how I'm going to handle this situation. And it really puts passengers at ease, and it was kind of really cool to hear that they were really planning that far out when I was actually training at that flight school. They also go over if you're coming in for a landing and you have to do a go-around, like so that your passenger isn't confused as to why the engine starts to run up again and why you guys are taking off again. Like a go-around is a very quick procedure, right? So it is helpful to have the passenger be aware, like, okay, that's fine, these things happen. We're not in like serious danger or something like that. Along those lines, the next thing I go over is what happens if you are in an emergency and you make an emergency landing, right? So you make your emergency landing, we go over the door operation again, seatbelt, yes. But also, when you step outside of the aircraft, make sure that you aren't walking in front of it, right? Just run off to the side. Don't run toward the propeller, right? And it seems like common sense, I know. But in an emergency situation, common sense goes out the window. The next thing I go over with some of my passengers, and I would say most of my passengers, is the radio equipment, right? So we've seen stories of pilots being incapacitated while flying the aircraft, and then I think it was one in like the Bahamas where the passenger actually had to land the aircraft. I can't remember. I'll post the story above. I think it's really important for people to know the radio components, right? So literally just what the radio frequency is, 121.5, and then how to operate the radio by pressing the push to talk button, right? So I think it's really important for passengers to know that. So that's one thing. That's kind of a bonus tip. I'm not sure that everybody needs to know how to do that, but I think it's pretty important. And the very last thing I do before we actually take off, I ask my passengers specifically, what questions do you have? And I phrase it like that because I know there's going to be questions, and that welcomes them to ask their questions. So instead of saying, are there any questions? I say, what questions do you have? I'm very intentional with my wording there. And that concludes the third stage of the passenger briefing. The main point of this video is to explain that there's so much more that we can brief our passengers on. There's so much information out there, we don't want to overload them, but we want them to have a comfortable and safe flight. So walking them through this process hopefully will help your passengers feel comfortable. Now that you've made it this far, please, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you want to talk more about, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your inputs and understand what type of things you bring up in your passenger briefings as well. Until next time, I will see y'all in the sky.